So, I've been filming a lot of my YouTube videos on these three lenses right here. In fact, almost all of them. The Sirui Saturn 35-50 and 75mm anamorphics. Anamorphic lenses have been a dream of mine for years. Like most of us, I grew up looking at that super wide cinema look. The way the background stretches, the flash, the oval bokeh, and then I looked at the rental prices and all the sales prices and quietly went back to my little spherical pride. So when these Saturns came out, they were small, full frame, and actually kind of affordable. I knew I had to try them, and over time they went from fun little experiment to my main YouTube lenses. Today I want to talk about what they're actually like to live with, the good, the bad, the weird, and the stuff I have to fix in post, because they're not perfect, and they're definitely not for everyone. But if you're chasing a cinematic image and you're doing it mostly as a solo creator or a small crew, these might be one of the most realistic ways to get that. Let's start with the basics. On paper, these are full-frame anamorphic cine primes. They're all T2.9. They're all around the same size and weight, and they all have a 1.6 times anamorphic squeeze. At least that's what the marketing says. In reality, because I'm a bit of a nerd, I tested them, and the squeeze is not exactly 1.6. On the 35, I'm getting closer to about 1.575 or 1.58. The 50 works out roughly around 1.6, and the 75 is closer to 1.7 times in my test. Is that a problem? Not really. In practical use, they behave like a constant squeeze set, which is the most important part. They don't suddenly change shape when you rec focus from near to far. Lines stay fairly consistent. Your image doesn't wobble or stretch in a weird way as you pull focus. So functionally, they're a 1.6 times set. The measured numbers are just a little bit of a fun-filled trivia for people like me who is quite OCD about it. Now, what does that 1.6 squeeze actually mean in terms of field of view? This is the 35, so as you can see, it's about a 22mm width. So here's an interesting bit. You tend to compose your shots based on the width of the image, not the height of the image. So yeah, consider this as a 22 rather than a 35. So this is the 50. The 50 is more like a 30mm width. Again, so this is the 50. So as you can see, this is the width of the field. So this is the 50. It's equivalent to about 31mm. I don't use the 50 very often, but it comes in the set. But so yeah, here's the 50. Now we're going to shoot the 75. This is possibly the most annoying one, but possibly my favorite one of all. Now this is the 75. The 75 has a width of about a 42-43 range, which is interesting because 43mm is equivalent to human vision, the width of what you see. It's not actually 50, because if you film using a 50, you find that you need to step forward or step back very, very often. There's a reason why the Leica Q3 gets released in 43. So yeah, it is literally human vision, but you do get the compression of the 75. I would argue that the 75 is actually the normal lens, not the 50. If you shoot 16:9 video and then you de-squeeze 1.6 times, you're landing somewhere around 2.8 to 1. Super wide, very cinematic. If your camera lets you use a 3:2 open gate mode and you de-squeeze that, you end up closer to a 2.4 to 1 cinema style aspect ratio, which is what you're seeing now. So you can choose extra ultra wide for drama or a little slightly more classic cinema with. Now, let's talk money for a second. When these first appeared, they were already relatively affordable, but over time, the street prices have dropped even more. Depending on where you are and what sales are going on, these can sit somewhere in the roughly $500 each kind of range. Obviously, that number moves around a bit, but the main point is, For full-frame anamorphic cine-primes, these are some of the most affordable lenses you can realistically own. So in the context of full-frame video cameras and cinema cameras, the Saturns are in a weird sweet spot. Cheap for what they are, but still not throwaway money. Physically, they're kind of ridiculous. They're tiny. They're made with a lot of carbon fiber on the outer shell, so they are light. All three lenses are around that under 500 gram mark, which for an anamorphic cine-prime is absurd. This is what makes them so good for YouTube-style production like mine. You can throw them on a gimbal without your arms falling off. You can run a fairly compact rig, camera, cage, small matte box, and you're still in I can carry this all day territory. The focus rings and aperture rings are geared for follow focus, but they're not so stiff that you can't just grab them and pull focus by hand. The set is reasonably consistent in size and gear positions too, which means if you're swapping between 35, 50 and 75, you're not constantly rebuilding your rig. So from a practicality standpoint, they're very creator-friendly. You get cine lens behavior without cine lens bulk. Now let's talk about the image, because this is where my relationship with these lenses become a bit complicated. Out of the box, the Saturns are clean, like almost too clean. Let's just not kid ourselves. They are too clean. The first time I shot with them, I was just disappointed, to be honest. I had this expectation of old school anamorphic funk, weird aberrations, smeared edges, a bit of chaos, and tons of character. Instead, I got something that looked like a very nice modern lens that just happened to be really wide with oval bokeh. That's because the Saturns use aspherical elements and a pretty modern optical design. You're trying to control aberrations and sharpness to appeal to people who want something professional and predictable. And to be fair, they succeeded, if that was what they were going for. Center sharpness is surprisingly good. Even the corners, once you de-squeeze, they're not nearly as wild as vintage anamorphics. There's still a bit of character, a bit of separation because you're anamorphics, but it's not that messy, dreamy smudge some people like me are looking for. So if you're expecting old Panavision C-series vibes out of the box, you will not get that. What you get is more like modern glass anamorphic geometry and room to add your own source in post, which is exactly what I ended up doing. I like my images and videos to have texture. I don't want it to look like a stock commercial for a phone. Once I've done lens correction, I drop on LensNode. It's one of my favorite plugins now. You can watch the video somewhere. There. Can I actually put cards on anamorphic images? I don't know, but anyways, because the Saturns are so clean, LensNode is where I start adding character. A bit of halation, some weird edge roll-off, a little imperfection, nothing crazy, just enough to soften that clinical feel and make it look more like something with a bit of soul. Believe me, it drives my editor insane. That combination of 3x2 squeeze workflow, technical fixes, first LensNode for character, then de-squeeze to a 2.39x1 timeline gives me an image that feels like something between modern and nostalgic. Sirui offers blue flare and neutral flare versions of these lenses. I personally went with the neutral flare versions because blue flare lenses can look very cool in the right context, but they can also hijack your shot. You put a bright light in the frame and suddenly everything screams sci-fi fan film. Look, it will look like the Transformers, every single video of yours. Neutral flare versions, which I use, are more subtle. The flare tends to pick up the color of the light source. So if it's a warm tungsten practical, the flare is warm. If it's a cool LED, it goes cooler. Even RGB, reds, purples, and what have you, you will have different color flares. That makes the Saturn much easier to integrate into real-world YouTube production, client work, and mixed lighting situations. I can have flares, but they don't dominate the image unless I want them to. In LensNode, I can then decide how far I want to push those flares visually, but the underlying behavior from the lens itself is already more flexible. Let's talk focus and focus breathing. These are manual focus lenses. Obviously, the focus throw is not super long like some giant cine-primes, but it's long enough to be smooth and usable. There is focus breathing when you rec focus from near to far. you will see the field of view shift a bit. It's not insane, but it's visible. For narrative work, you might want to be aware of it. For most YouTube talking heads and B-roll, I don't find it to be a deal breaker. And to be honest, the general public wouldn't notice focus breathing anyway. Most of the films that you see in the past, especially using vintage glass, they all have focus breathing. What's more frustrating to me is the minimum focus distance. All three lenses focus down to about 0.9, 0.7 meters, or around 3 feet. That's not very close. For portraits where I want to be in slightly closer, or for product shots on the table, that minimum focus can feel a bit limiting. You either have to step back physically or accept that your subject isn't going to fill as much of the frame as you might want. So to get around that, I use diopters. Pop 1 or 2 of them on the front, and suddenly you can get that nice intimate close-up with the background still stretched and cinematic. The trade-off is the diopters can introduce their own flavor of distortion and edge softness, especially at wider apertures. But honestly, with the Saturns being so clean, I actually like the extra imperfection that diopters bring. So I mentioned the minimum focus distance thing earlier in this video. I know I keep repeating myself in this video, but bear with me. Now here's the thing, 35mm, you really want to film close, as in probably 50, 60 centimeters from the camera to make, this sort of footage. And I find myself permanently having the +1 diopter on the lens, so you might want to consider that. Speaking of aperture, let's address the speed. The Saturns are t2.9 across the set. Not slow, but not fast either. Do I wish they were faster? Of course. A T2 version of these would be amazing, especially on the 75mm for portraits, but that will drive the prices up. That will make the lenses a lot bigger. But when you look at what fast anamorphic lenses look like, they're absolutely massive, extremely heavy, and extremely expensive. You start to understand the compromise. Vintage anamorphics are seldom truly fast anyway, and modern high-speed anamorphics that are fast tend to be rental-only territory for most of us. So in context, T2.9 on these tiny sub-500-gram lenses, it's quite reasonable, isn't it? Practically, if I'm shooting indoors, I just light accordingly. For YouTube talking heads, I'm usually stopping down a little anyway to keep my face in focus when I move. For B-roll and moody shots, T2.9 is still shallow enough on full frame to give you that really nice separation. So yes, T2 would be nice, but I'm not shocked that physics said no. Let's circle back to how these lenses actually feel in real-life YouTube use. For me, the 35mm is the hero of the set. If you're only going to buy one Saturn, I would say get the 35. On full frame, once you de-squeeze, it behaves like a roughly 22mm horizontally. That means you can use it in small rooms. You can hold the camera fairly close and still get enough environment around you to feel cinematic. It's wide enough for vlogging. Wide enough? No, it's not wide enough for vlogging. It's wide enough for handheld walk and talk, yes. And it gives you that classic anamorphic look even when you don't have enough space. Yeah, the reason why you can't vlog with a 22mm wide lens, 35mm high, is a close focusing distance. Diopters, yes, but after diopters, there's too many filters involved. 50mm is my normal lens. It behaves like a 35mm spherical horizontally, which feels very natural. It's great for medium shots, documentary stuff, low-key portraits, and general narrative work. If you're not sure where to start, the 50mm is a safe choice. 75mm becomes the portrait weapon, like here. This is a 75. Horizontally, it's more like a 47mm spherical, but the anamorphic squeeze and compression, it feels incredibly cinematic on faces. Great for interviews, great for tight emotional shots, great for product and detail work, as long as you have the space to back up. I find myself using the 35mm the most, the 75mm second, and the 50 last, because 50mm is quite boring, to be honest. And Sirui, if you're watching this, the only thing that would make this set feel truly complete for me would be 2 more lenses. A really wide 24mm and a longer 105. A 24 on this system would be insane for tiny rooms, gimbals, and big establishing shots. 105 would be beautiful for compressed portraits and tighter storytelling. So if you ever decide to expand the Saturn line, please give us a 24 and a 105. There are some quirks you want to know about. First, They're manual, everything. No autofocus, no electronic communication. So if you're used to hybrid shooting where you rely heavily on autofocus, you're going to need to adjust your workflow. Second, they're very mount specific. You have to buy them in the mount you need. Sony E, Canon RF, Nikon Z, L mounts. So choose wisely based on the camera system you plan to use for the next few years. Third, combination of minimum focus distance and anamorphic look means you can't always get the shot you think you want from the spot you're standing. Sometimes you have to move. Sometimes you need a diopter. Sometimes you need both. Anyways, we have feet. But honestly, that's the fun part though. These aren't point and shoot vlog lenses. They force you to be a little bit more deliberate. So after all that, where do I stand with these Saturns? For me, they've become the workhorse anamorphics for my YouTube channel. They're not perfect. They breathe, they have pincushion distortion, they need correction. They're a bit too clean out of the box. The minimum focus is further than I'd like. The T2.9 isn't exactly low light monster territory. But here's the thing about these lenses. They are small. They are very light. They are genuinely usable on gimbals and small rigs. They give you that beautiful wide aspect ratio. They give you oval bokeh. They fly in a way that's controllable, especially with the neutral coating. They're consistent across the set, and they're within reach for a lot of creators who can never touch traditional cinema anamorphics. So if you've always dreamt of anamorphic lenses the way that I did, and you're wondering where to start, I'd say this. You start small, you start realistic, and if you're going to only pick one, get the 35mm Saturn. And that for me is why these little Saturns haven't left my rig in a long time.